Good evening, and thank you for joining us for another informational session. As you all know, every fourth Thursday, we do our best to have an informational session, something that we think is going to be helpful and beneficial to our parents and caregivers. I'm not sure if you were here for our last informational session. I want to say it was September the 24th. However, if you did not see it, you need to see that. And I'm sorry, it wasn't September the 24th, it was August the 28th. But we talked about compensatory services. Compensatory services, for those that don't know, is when the school has wronged or neglected your child in an area, and in order for them to kind of make them whole, they give you compensatory services. And just to break it down in layman's terms, if you go somewhere and you're not satisfied with the service that you received, and you did not feel like you received the services that you paid for, what happens is you're going to ask to speak to the manager. I know I do. You ask to speak to the manager, and you ask to be made whole. You ask, hey, do they lessen the amount? Do they give you more time? Do they give it to you free? So this is what compensatory is. It's just compensating the student, the individual, for services that they may not have received, or um they may not have received to the best of the school's ability. So I will say, with that being said, I'm going to turn this over to Lisa. We're going to do a recap from August the 28th, and then we're going to move into part two. Because if you did see part one, you noticed that it was a lot going on, and I did not want to rush it. So we decided, let's do part two. Okay, so with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa.
Hello, Paula. Thank you so much again for having me. And just thank you for allowing, parents and advocates to have a platform to be able to share this information with other similarly situated families. Um, as we talked about in our first session, that it's unfortunate that we have to have this conversation, but it is a very relevant and necessary conversation. This conversation generally begins because a family finds out that their child's federal educational rights have been violated, or the school has failed in some area to meet the legal standard for special education and for educating children with disabilities. So, with that said, even though it's a difficult conversation for me to have today on a personal level, because I am embattled with my son's school district as I continue to advocate for his rights, and just finding out the catastrophic failures that have been afflicted upon him, and with a sobering reality that because of his multiple disabilities, while he may receive compensatory services, those educational deficits that occurred because of the catastrophic failures may never be, the gaps may never be closed. So I speak again from a place of personal pain, but I want to share this information because parents truly need to understand their rights, and they truly need to understand what steps that can be taken when their children are in dire need of support so that they can participate and, receive a FAPE, which is a free and appropriate public education. So the agenda, I have revamped the agenda, which is on the next slide, to kind of tell you, to kind of give you some insight about what our conversation is going to touch on today. We're going to talk about the Supreme Court and its gargantuan impact on special education and children with disabilities. And then we're going to have, some more discussion. We did have a very great discussion in our first component. And so we like to continue that discussion on compensatory services. One of the things Paula stated in her introduction is that it's about being made whole. And we're not talking being made whole in the context of dollars, as if, there was a personal injury suit being brought forward and you're made whole. We're talking at being made whole educationally, providing those services. We will talk about the Perez decision, which absolutely speaks to compensatory damages. But for the most part, our discussion is going to be about how do we make these children whole when the system fails. And I'm saying the system because I don't want to target teachers. I don't want to target a particular school. I don't want to target a school district. But it is a system that is consistently failing our children. And without parents like myself, Paula, and the other aggressive advocates around the country, these failures will go largely unnoticed and ignored. And I'm going to share a little bit of my personal story. Paula has already talked about her personal story. We would love to have more conversation on that. And then we do have a slide where we're going to talk about the challenges, best practices, and legal considerations. So, Paula, today I introduced this new slide, the context of the topic, compensatory services and compensatory education. And so I have the bullets broken out right and left. And I did that for a reason, because as I was meditating on our presentation today, sometimes because I am so adept with legal language and understanding the federal laws that wrap around our children, I understand that for a novice or a beginner parent, a parent beginning their advocacy journey, it can be a little bit overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to really make sure that I'm speaking in a very clear and clarifying manner, because when we talk about compensatory services and compensatory education, there are two roads to get there. One is that if you elect to go beyond your IEP team, you elect to go beyond a due process, you elect to go beyond mediation, and you go to the federal court system. So there's federal legislation, federal court system, federal court case law on the record in the area of compensatory services. So a federal judge can award compensatory services, compensatory education. And then, of course, on the other side of that, which is what we're really talking about today, I just want to be very clear that we're not talking about this as a parent being in a court venue. What we're mostly talking about, Paula, is we're talking about the IEP venue, the school level venue. And so I just wanted to separate that out, because those are two very different things. Same thing, but you have different levels of authority. So the authority that we're dealing with is the IEP teams and the compliance divisions within the school district. And then the letters of finding, that's something that's issued by the State Department of Education. And this can happen when parents file administrative complaints. This can happen when parents disagree with the findings of an IEP team. This can happen when there's catastrophic events. We talked about the global pandemic, where compensatory education and services will be awarded. And then there's also mediation. Parents can elect to go into mediation with their local school district. I don't promote that either way. And just so that while we're talking, I'm not a lawyer. I'm a parent advocate. I'm a global special education ambassador. I do consider myself to be well learned in this area. But I will suggest that if you ever elect to go through mediation, make sure you understand what your rights are and what are the governing rules to entering into a mediation agreement with the school district, because that often entails you having to sign an NDA or something comparable, confidentiality agreement.
And for
My
those who may not know, I know we know what an NDA is, but for those that don't know, Lisa, tell them what an NDA is,
An
please.
NDA is when you are essentially agreeing to never repeat or disclose what happened in that mediation. So, if the school, and I'm just being extreme here, if the school decides to award you private placement in a very prestigious non-public educational institution because of your complaints, you can't you can't disclose to anyone how you and the school reached that agreement and what benefits you may or may not have been awarded to the school by the school in that agreement. It is a confidential process. You have to be very careful with that, because if you are found to have violated an NDA or any type of confidentiality agreement, there can be some civil penalties attached to that. And then also you can find yourself in a situation where the agreed upon remedy or settlement is revoked by the school district. So I just always like to tell parents that, because mediation is a wonderful thing, but you have to understand what you're giving up when you agree to do that. For me, Paula, as a global special education ambassador, I would never enter into mediation, because I will never secret away from other parents very valuable information and tools to help them become successful in advocating for their children. But that's just my personal position.
Okay.
So I just wanted to make sure that we're clear going forward. We're not talking about the court awarding compensatory services. We're talking about the IEP team, the compliance office in your school district, and then compensatory services and awards that result from letters of findings by the state educational agency that may conduct an investigation into your administrative complaints. Is that clarifying, Paula?
It is. It is.
Thank you, because there's a lot of case law out there, and
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't want a parent to march into an IEP meeting with the case law, not understanding that that a judge has a different level of authority than the IEP team or due process, or the administrative law judge in a due process hearing. Those are two separate things.
And I'm
But
glad you're clarifying that,
thank
because
you.
I know when I did go through that, I did think I was going to show up in a courtroom. So when I came, it was in, I think it was in the main building of the school, that
Mhm.
school for that time. So you're right. It's for parents that don't know. You don't go to a courthouse. You're not summoned by a judge, and it's an administrative judge. So it's a totally different process.
Yes. But we're very happy that the federal courts have consistently ruled, to include the United States Supreme Court, have consistently, while there have been missteps over the years, particularly in the Fourth Circuit, some would argue the Third Circuit. And Maryland, for those of you who are in Maryland, we're in the Fourth Circuit. There have been a number of missteps over the years in special education litigation, but we're very fortunate now that there has been a complete shift in the landscape. And so we're
Mhm.
seeing more and more decisions in favor of the protections that have been already guaranteed to our children through the United States Constitution and through congressional legislation.
Mhm.
And so the appellate courts have also been very active in this process. So we move on to our next slide. We talked in depth about disability and what that really means, because if you don't have a functional knowledge of it, you may not totally understand what a qualifying disability is.
Mhm.
And for those of us who have a very healthy relationship with IDEA, we know that there are a list of disabilities that are recognized and codified into law. And for those of us who are in the workforce, and we also use the American with Disabilities Act, there are also a list of disabilities that are codified into the American with Disabilities Act. And so it's very important that you understand that, because if your child doesn't have a qualifying disability, then your child would not be able to receive special education services. That may necessarily not preclude them from receiving um, federal support. Access to their federal rights under the American with Disabilities Act, and then also Section 504 of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act. So one of the things I like when I talk about 504, I like to give the example of, you have a child who's a football player and he gets hurt. And so he has this body cast, or his leg is in a cast and he's in a wheelchair, he has crutches. That's the appropriate time to seek a 504, because he's what we would consider to be temporarily disabled. And then the school will have to accommodate him, whether that's putting him in an area where it's wheelchair accessible, giving, if he drives to school or a family brings him, having a dedicated handicap parking spot. That's a temporary disability. That's a child who is not disabled, but still entitled to protections under Section 504 to receive the accommodations that he would be in need of. And so now this is my favorite part of the presentation, where we talk about the unanimous Supreme Court decisions in 2017 and 2023. And to the left of the screen, the Andrews decision was the 2017 decision. And then to the right, the Perez decision was in 2023. So just to show you the recency of these decisions. Now we're going to talk about a case that pretty much initiated compensatory education. And that case was in 1985, and that's the Burlington decision. But the reason I like to talk about these is because if you look at that time frame, Paula, from 1985 to 2017, a lot was lost in between there. But I think that our courts are demonstrating a renewed posture to support and to ensure that our children receive the federal protections that they're entitled to. And both of these cases are central to our discussion, Paula, because I'm so sorry I keep saying and I do apologize. They're central to our discussion because compensatory services or compensatory education and remedies are wrapped into both of these cases. So the first one is the Andrew decision. And to my surprise, I generally include these two Supreme Court cases when I am filing administrative complaints, and sometimes even when I'm communicating with the IEP. So I definitely want to encourage parents to just try to grasp the Andrew F language and then look at the Perez language. And when you are crafting your administrative complaints, it's very important to refer to these decisions when you're talking with school officials. As I always say, it invites a level of seriousness into the conversation, and it absolutely sets a legal framework for your discussion and for what you're requesting. The Andrew decision, that was in 2017. And this was a student who had ADHD. And I'm just going to give a quick summary here. And he was making little to no progress on the school IEP goals. And this is an important part of our conversation, Paula, because we need parents to understand how important it is for them to be a part of the goal-making process, because goals are really the backbone to the IEP. And so if the goals are inappropriate, if they're not targeted, if they're not well developed and well defined, the child isn't going to make any progress. So this student, just to speed the story up, he made little to no progress. The parents removed him from the public school system and enrolled him in a private school, where he made significant progress.
So it showed he was capable.
Exactly. If he had the adequate supports, and then you'll hear a reasonably calculated IEP. if he
Mhm.
had an IEP that was developed for him to be successful, he absolutely could have been. And
Mhm.
so this is not to beat up on the public school system. It's
Mhm.
not. But this is an opportunity right now, I believe, for school systems to have a reckoning and to really do some soul searching and to have some introspection on try to reimagine what special education looks like for our disabled population of students. So this particular case, the parents went to put him in private school, and as you can imagine, it was very costly. So they went back to the school district and said, look, he actually made progress. He had the correct goals. So that tells me he, could have done the same thing had the IEP been reasonably calculated. And so they sought reimbursement. And of course, the school district didn't want to reimburse the parents. So, of course, they filed suit. And that is what we now know today to be the Andrew F. case versus U.S. Douglas, versus Douglas County School District.
Mhm.
And guess what? The Supreme Court sided with the parents. And I thought I had it. I must have left it in another room. But I wanted to read some of the very strong language that the Honorable Chief Justice Roberts wrote into his opinion. But it was some very strong and stern language. And essentially, it stated that there is now a higher standard for the educational benefits school must provide to students with disabilities. The key word, the operative word there, Paula, is higher standard.
Mhm.
The IEP must be reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of their circumstances. We understand that all of our children have individual limitations, individual disabilities, which is why they require individualized education plans.
Mhm.
This case set the standard and it rejected the previous standard. And that's why I was telling you that the courts, there were some misses, there were some failures along the way, but thank God for the Supreme Court because they did course correction because
Mhm.
their de minimis, which is minimal benefit standard, it was a standard that was accepted across this nation in a lot of federal courts. But the US Supreme Court rejected this model and they said de minimis no more. Minimal benefits requiring schools, and now schools are required to offer a more meaningful and ambitious progress for students with disabilities under IDEA. And this, parents, this is the language you have to use when you see that your child is not making progress and your child is really kind of marking time. They're not moving forward. We're hoping they're not going backwards and regressing. But Paula, for you and your advocacy for your daughter, I like the language meaningful and ambitious.
Mhm. I do
And so
too.
we all have to internalize what that means for our individual children.
Mhm.
But we know when there's no progress and when those goals are not ambitious.
Mhm.
In fact, I had another parent that I work closely with. Her son is, just hypothetically stating, he's in the 6th or 7th grade. She did research on the goals that were in his IEP, and they were found to be several grade levels below his actual
Mm.
grade. And
Mm.
understand, those goals have to be commensurate with the grade level.
Mhm.
So how could he be making any progress if the goals were so low and just completely inappropriate
Mhm.
to understand another very powerful word, his present levels? If you don't have goals to get him to his present levels, how will we ever really understand what his true present levels are? So this is really important. I love to talk about these cases because it helps it empowers the parents, and it gives you that framework in which to work with your IEP team. The next
And in
case
a
is,
sense,
yes,
another
okay.
thing I like, another way of looking at this is these students need to be challenged just like everybody else. And I
Thank
think,
you.
yeah, I think when they're not being challenged, they're kind of being deprived,
Mhm.
and again, that's where they go. To me, they take it upon themselves to almost say that they're not capable of learning anything. And that's where, to me, that becomes disheartening, because I don't think we should say that about anybody. So I think just like I challenged my son, I challenge Morgan, I challenge her on the home front. I
Mhm.
want her challenged on the school front. I want to challenge her in every aspect of her life, because if I don't, then she what is it? She remains stagnant. She's not going to do any more than what she's kind of encouraged to do. So once I encourage her, Morgan looks for ways to do things so that she can get the applause and get the accolades. So that's another thing, parents, I want us to understand. Don't limit your special needs individual. Make sure that they're challenged, and make sure that their goals represent that.
So excellent. And really, and you put that in layman's terms, really
Mhm.
what Andrews represents
Mhm.
when it says meaningful and ambitious.
Mhm.
And I'm in a position, my son is below grade level, two and a half, nearly three grade levels. And I'm not concerned that he may ever catch up. I'm
Mhm.
concerned that we start closing the gap, because if we don't close the gap is going to widen.
Mhm.
And that's completely unfair to him
Mhm.
when he is entrusted into a school system that should be creating meaningful and ambitious progress for him, so that he can have a meaningful opportunity for educational advancement.
Mhm.
So sometimes schools get on the defense and they think, well, this child is disabled. This child may never be able to do this. And
Mhm.
that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about moving the child forward, even if it's one step at a time.
Mhm.
Even
Mhm.
if it is at the pace of a turtle, it's moving a child forward. And
Mhm.
so I take that very seriously. The Perez v. Sturgis, this one is really good because this eliminated the requirement for parents with students with disabilities to exhaust the administrative remedies under IDEA. We talked about a few of those. First of all, if you have a disagreement with your IEP team on something, you should tell the IEP team, and make sure it's documented in the prior written notice, also known as PWN, is that I disagree with X. Then you can certainly go to your building principal and say, I agree with X. The building principal is normally a part of the IEP meetings and is a part of the IEP team.
Mhm.
Um, pardon me. And then if you're not, if you don't get any redress there, then you can move on and file. You can ask for mediation. That's a step.
Mhm.
And then you can, if that doesn't work, you can move on to the next step of filing that administrative complaint. And then you also have the opportunity to file a due process complaint. These are very important steps because many of them have statutory limitations on them. So, with an administrative complaint, you can only go back 1 year from the date of your filing. And I want to make sure I'm saying this correct. With a due process complaint, you can go back 2 years. So it's very important, if you want to exhaust these administrative steps, that you understand at each step what timelines are applicable, and then understand what your individual rights are, and then what concessions you may have to make along the way.
Mhm.
The Perez decision was pretty extreme. It's a very unfortunate case. This was a deaf child. And I believe this case originated in a school district near one of our advocacy team members in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
But this was a deaf child who was not provided adequate language support. I was reading through the case not recently, so I'm just going to speak in generalities here. But the person that was supposed to be interpreting for him wasn't qualified. That person sometimes didn't even show up to work. There were
Mm,
just so many gross failures. So
mm,
this is a young man, and he went all the way through, and he just didn't make any progress. And his parents finally decided that they were going to take legal action.
mm,
Now, before, while after the case was making it through the different courts, because it ultimately ended up at the Supreme Court, the school did, make him whole. But the most important thing here is that for parents to understand that under IDEA, we cannot, IDEA does not allow for compensatory damages. And we're talking money damages.
mhm,
So under IDEA, there is no allowance for parents to recover financial compensatory damages. Perez said not only can you, of course, under Title II of the ADA, which is again very important why you use that language when you're dealing with the school districts. The United States Supreme Court not only said you can pursue compensatory damages under Title II of the ADA, but you also no longer have a requirement to exhaust your administrative remedies, meaning you don't have to go through those steps.
mhm,
You can go straight to the court. So this is a very powerful decision because a lot of times school districts, they're kind of they're able to take cover because they know that before this that you had to go through those administrative steps. So that
mhm,
gives the school district a little cover. Here, you can go straight to federal court. And at that time, there's no cover to be given.
mhm,
You're going to have to be, respond to the federal complaint and then, defend it rigorously or however they plan to. But with a lot of these state, like, okay, so for example, a lot of times with the state, you have to understand that the state has a vested interest in school districts not completely failing because the US Department of Education, for those people who want to understand how the federal dollars for disabled students are provided, but it goes to the state, and then the state provides those dollars to the individual school districts. And so, if a school district is failing, and if the state Department of Education is failing in aggressively investigating these complaints and making sure that the schools are in compliance with federal law, then the US Department of Education can withhold, as part of a penalty, they can
mhm,
withhold federal dollars.
mhm,
So I say that to say you can have confidence in your state, but understand they have a vested interest in the complaint process not going totally off the rails. So this is a very complicated set of issues that
mhm,
many parents don't even realize affect their children.
mhm,
So schools should be incentivized to be in compliance and act with fidelity when implementing and designing and reasonably calculating IEPs. They should be incentivized because
mhm,
that is a way to ensure that those federal dollars will continue to come in to support our children. And then states should be incentivized by monitoring and ensuring the federal compliance. So again, that there's no disruption to the federal funding.
mhm,
So anyway, we no longer have to do that. The United States Supreme Court said you are welcome to go straight in and seek compensatory damages for violations of the American with Disability Act. um, so Miguel, okay, so I told you about how he was deaf. The school just failed in in every imaginable way. Really want to encourage people to just kind of read that case and get the highlights so that you can see this wasn't a parent that was just complaining. They had bona fide complaints, and then they had evidence of where the school district failed. So now we can, thanks to Perez and his family, we can now, as a global special education audience, we can seek broader remedies for violations of our students' rights. All righty. So federal protection for the approximately 7.5 million disabled students in the United States. We talked about this in our last session. Mm-hmm. 7.5 million is staggering. That is a staggering number.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting, Paula, is because of the rate of that autism is being diagnosed and a few other disabilities, we can expect this number to balloon in the near future.
Yeah.
And again, when my son was diagnosed with autism in 2017, it was 1 in every 36 births. I hear recently now it's like maybe 1 in every 20, late 20s, or either 30, 31. They keep moving it. It keeps moving up and down. So I don't want to say that, but it's dropped at least 7 to 8 to 9 to 10 points. And we're talking since 2017. So this is going to balloon. And that's why I said earlier that it's important for our school systems to have a reckoning and really reimagine how we process special education for children with disabilities. Because as parents, as the diagnoses become more prominent, parents are also, thanks to YouTube, thanks to advocacy, thanks for other advocacy vehicles, parents are becoming more and more empowered. They're becoming more educated about this advocacy process. And I would just offer you, one of the things that I'm going to talk about is my state complaint. This is my third complaint. The reference number on there for the state of Maryland was 25-409. That's 409 complaints when I filed that complaint back in June or July. So that's 409 complaints in the state of Maryland. And I'm sure there were some after it. I have since filed another complaint, and I want to believe that we were 26-065, understanding that the fiscal year just flipped in the state of Maryland. So if it's 65, like within the first 30 to 45 days of the new fiscal year, you can imagine what that number is going to be 1 year from now.
So Lisa, how long does it take a lot of times for that complaint like to be filed and then for activity to be taken on it, like you go in front of an administrative judge? I know some things can be contingent upon like just what you're alleging as far as the school, but how do you have like a time frame of how long that normally takes?
Yes, ma'am. When you file an administrative complaint, the state agency, they have 60 days to investigate that complaint and issue what we call a letter of findings. Now, sometimes that's not a hard 60 days because there are extensions that are requested and granted for whatever reason. So in my second state complaint, the school district requested 2 additional weeks to gather documentation. I agreed. So that really knocked our 60-day time limit back, but generally it's 60 days. So I believe I filed that case at the end of June, and on July 31st or it was July 31st or August 1st, it was in my mailbox, my email box. So 60 days. And so remember, I'm testing you a little bit, Paula. Remember why it's so important. Remember why it's so important for parents to keep track of their ESY dates so that that decision has to be rendered 60 days prior to the end of the school year. So does that sound familiar? That's 60 days? Because if you don't agree, you can file, and then you have 60 days to get a decision from the state.
You're right. And I know that you said normally it's done somewhat like around like the beginning of the year or like like February. I think it's no later than February or March, right?
I think it's
Because
well, it depends on the last day of school. So you just want to
okay.
go to your you want to go to your school calendar for your district, and you
Mhm.
want to count back 60 calendar days,
Mhm.
not business days, calendar days.
Mhm.
And one of the reasons is because they want you to have an opportunity to file an administrative complaint,
Mhm.
because the state agency has 60 days to render a decision. And so if ESY, which in Maryland, or, most, it's treated in the summertime, but we know that that's not the definition of ESY. It's not summer school. However, that's just a big misnomer that is out there. But if your child is supposed to start, generally here in Maryland, in the county I live in, it starts right either before or after July 4th.
Mhm.
So if you don't have enough time to file that complaint, you may not get a decision in a timely enough manner to get, if the state agrees with you that the
Mhm.
child is eligible, then that child will be able to start. But if you wait and you say the last day of school, I'm filing a complaint, well, the ESY period is enveloped in that 60 days, and
Mhm.
it'll be kind of moot. So
Yeah.
that's why it's so important for parents to understand and watch that calendar, and kind of engage your team and see, kind of check their temperature. Hey, are we collecting data for that important ESY decision that's coming up? What kind of
Mhm.
data are we collecting? Prod them a little bit along the way, and
Mhm.
you'll begin to understand very quickly if they're going to support the eligibility decision or not.
Mhm.
And remember, it's an eligibility. It's not a recommendation, and the
Mhm.
criteria is laid out for the IEP teams to follow. So, just answering your question, that 60 days
Okay.
is tied to your ability to appeal. If they say no, we're not sending this child, and you say, okay, no problem, I'm going to appeal through the administrative state process.
Mhm.
So, okay, so if we could go to our next slide, and I just want our viewing audience to know that one of our technical gurus is going to work on this PowerPoint presentation, and this will be made available to the public in the coming weeks. It will be
Mhm.
available through Advocacy's website.
Yeah.
So if you are having a hard time seeing or viewing the screen, or if we're going too fast, understand that this will be made available to the viewing audience.
Mhm.
And so we talked about last time compensatory services. Um, and one of the things that I find very unique about this, these are equitable remedies when a student has been denied FAPE.
Mhm.
Um, and then remember also there are catastrophic events that can happen as well. I don't mean to limit it to just being denied FAPE, but for the purpose of our conversation. So, my question to the viewing audience is, where are compensatory services found in IDEA or Section 504 of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act? The answer is, Paula, it's not found. You will
Mm.
not find this explicit language
Mm.
codified into the laws fashioned to protect our children. So don't go researching in the Code of Federal Regulations for compensatory services. This has been something that the courts have. And again, we know our case that pretty much preempted all of this was the Burlington decision in 1985. The
Mhm.
courts pretty much determined that these children were entitled to relief. And so the equitable relief and remedy is the school IEP word is compensatory services. But primarily, the courts possess broad authority to grant compensatory services, and or you'll see the term compensatory education. That legal precedent was established in 1985 when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that parents could be reimbursed if the
Mhm.
IEP, if it was found that the IEP and or placement were inappropriate. And
Mhm.
again, this is where advocacy comes in at. You have
Yeah.
to be courageous enough to face that IEP team. And you have to
Mhm.
be courageous enough to say, my child isn't making progress.
Yeah.
and you have not produced adequate amount of data to support the decisions that you're making. You're telling me no to things that I'm requesting, but you don't have any data to support your no's. This is where the courage comes in for advocates. And I won't pretend it's not an easy road, but it's a
No,
necessary road.
because at that point you're challenging their data.
Mm-hmm.
So
If
don't
they have data at all.
exactly. But there's sometimes, you can be as a parent, and I'll be honest, when they said they had data, I just thought, who am I to challenge that? They are the experts, and you think, okay, I'm not going to challenge the data, but you know what your data is looking at your special needs individual and not seeing what they're saying on paper. So if Morgan's not going to do well for anybody else, I know she'll do well for me. So if
That's
I say, hey, Morgan, let show me what you can do. And they say, hey, she can identify her ABCs from A to Z, and I put them in front of her, and she does not do it, then they have to prove to me that what they're putting on that paper is true. And a lot of the times that's where you as the parents, that's where the fight comes in. Like Lisa said, nobody wants to take on the fight, but being realistic, anytime you're challenging someone's data, you're calling them a liar. Let's keep it real. And so that's where the fight's gonna come in. So parents, there are times that you're gonna have to put your child to the test. And what I did at home, I will say this, I taped Morgan doing some of the things that they said she could do. And I
so
brought it back to the
important.
team and I said, she's not doing this. Who says she's doing it? And they said, but she's doing it. I said, well, show me. And so what I did was when I went up and I stood behind a glass, because they said the kids act different with their parents, I still didn't see it. So the data that they were presenting was not factual data. Don't be afraid to challenge that.
That's right, because sometimes we're human and teachers are human too. So
Hmm.
sometimes it's very easy for your subjective opinions to creep into
Hmm.
the process.
Hmm.
But there is no room for subjectivity when we're talking about an IEP. It needs to be
Exactly.
objective, and teachers need to be neutral.
Hmm.
And they need to understand that when you're working with these children, that you have to set your personal belief system aside. And
Yes.
unfortunately, a lot of, in my opinion, not advocacy's opinion, that there are a
Hmm.
lot of people that are in the teaching profession that have resistance to special education, disabled children being educated alongside their non-disabled peers.
Hmm. Hmm.
I know people personally. I've sat back and listened. They didn't know who I was or what I stood for, but they have spoke in very diminishing ways about
Hmm.
disabled children being in general education.
Hmm.
And to me, if that's your attitude and your values and your belief systems, you probably should find a job that's more in alignment with that, because the federal law says is that they have every right to be there,
Hmm.
and they have every right to be protected, and they have every right to have a reasonably calculated IEP so that they can make meaningful educational progress.
Hmm.
And so again, our legal framework, you'll often hear when you get to the legal part of it, the Burlington framework. That's kind of like the test and the framework and the Burlington analysis that
Hmm.
courts go through when they're examining these cases, getting ready to reach their decisions.
Hmm.
We gave this example um, during our first presentation about just understanding who is covered, why they're covered, and those who are not. This was a very straightforward example. A student with dyslexia that may not be performing adequately for his or her grade level,
Hmm.
age level, but the IEP team agreed that the child's difficulty with reading is impacting his ability to learn. So here you have a child with dyslexia, which is a disability, not performing adequately for his age or grade level. I'm going to say age level. The IEP team stood up and made the right decision. And they said that the dyslexia is impacting his ability to learn. And so this particular student was covered under IDEA, Title II of the ADA, and Section 504 of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act.
Mm-hmm.
So again, knowing, understanding those disabilities. Oh, we can't leave this out, Paula, how important it is to get those disabilities documented through your medical providers and through the psychoeducational testing that's done by the schools.
Yes. Very
because
important.
All of that is going to help you to understand what layers of protection your child has. Now, here's our second example. We can move on to the next screen where we talk about the students with diabetes. And remember, we talked about understanding about the disabilities. This is a student with diabetes, but they're performing well without specialized instruction. In layman's term, this is a non-disabled student in the context of what we're talking about. But this student requires an accommodation because what happens with people with diabetes? They have to take insulin. They have to eat snacks at certain times. But they do not, this student doesn't need specially designed instruction. And so this is where I talked about that 504. Remember my example with the football player and the cast? It's accommodations. And so here the school may say, okay, well, we only eat at lunchtime. You can't eat at any other time. And then your mother has to give you your insulin before school. So, and I'm just saying hypothetically, these are their rules and their policies. You know, they don't want to bend. So here's where the ADA and 504 comes in and says, no, this student with diabetes will be participating in their educational program, and they will do so with accommodations so that they can take the medication and then eat the snacks at certain times. And so that 504 plan is going to be very specific. And it's going to say, you know, Lisa Wilson will have a snack at 8:15, 10:15, 11:15. But that's not a disabled student in the context of what we're talking about with IDEA. So just understanding medical disabilities, understanding temporary disabilities, understanding permanent disabilities, all of this is very important. So Paula, did you want to talk a little bit? We are moving along.
No, you know, I jump in as I see fit.
Well, I do want to take this opportunity to talk about my personal case that I filed a complaint on behalf of my son. As I said, actually June 3rd, it's dated June 3rd, and I received the decision August 1st. So my son, there were multiple allegations that I put forth on behalf of my son in the form of a 14-page complaint. And then the school district returned what we call, the state agency, the Maryland State Department of Education, returned what we call a letter of findings. So in the letter of findings, they discussed the allegations that they decided to investigate. They just talked about my son's IEP. They talked about, they gave background on some of the information based on their investigation. And then they moved into a part where they discussed each violation. And I just want to read some of those into the record for our audience today so that parents can understand how you get to compensatory services. So, and just to, in the interest of transparency, on I think 1 week ago, last Monday, we had the IEP meeting because of the violations that were found. for the compensatory discussion. And so there were several things that the school offered me based on their team that did some deep dives in his data.
Mm-hmm.
That part of the meeting, Paula, was very emotional for me because the data review team, they actually and truthfully displayed my son's data to show that he had not made any progress in the last 2 to 3 years. He's
Mm-hmm.
still at the same point that he was 3 years ago. And
Wow.
that was personally devastating for me. So while I'm excited that I'm able to learn all this and help other families and advocate for my son, on a personal level, it's devastating
Mm-hmm.
because what I see an educational deficit that was caused by employees of the school district who, in some cases, refused to implement his IEP. In other instances, ignored his IEP, failed to give him the accommodations that he needs and requires in light of his disabilities that
Mm-hmm.
are adequately outlined in the IEP. And I see a deficit um, that I don't know if my son will ever be able to overcome. So there's no celebrating this tremendous award that has been extended to us. But before I get to that award and I tell the audience what was offered to us, I just want to read. I just want to share some of the violations. Okay, so and for the viewing office, you can go to your state education department website and you can type in complaints in the search engine.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a duty and an obligation to redact the personally identifying information in these letters of findings. And they
Mm-hmm.
are actually warehoused on your state educational department website. So I recommend that all parents look at one,
Mm-hmm.
even if you have no intention on filing one, but it will help move you to understand the importance of the legal framework that surrounds and involves your child. So I'm just going to share, I'll share like allegation one. So the IEP team, I'm sorry, let me go back here. The allegation is that the school district did not ensure that an IEP team meeting was convened on June 4th, 2024, to include the required participants in accordance with 34 Code of Federal CFR Code of Federal Regulations, subsection 300.321. Specifically, the complainant alleged that there was no teacher of the visually impaired in attendance. I bring this example forward because parents should be educated to know who should be in first of all, who's on the IEP team and who
Mm-hmm.
should be present in the meetings, when, and when they are not, what rights do you have? And do you have a right to excuse that person? Yes, you do. And then do
Mm-hmm.
you have a right to refuse excusal? Yes, you do. And so in this instance, the teacher of the visually impaired had prepared a summary report and she issued it to everyone on the IEP team. Well, because she is specifically certified in visually impaired, the interpretations and the implications of that report needed to be supported by her. So you
Mm-hmm.
can't just issue a report, a specialized report to people who don't have any credentials to understand or
Mm.
interpret or implement that report.
Makes sense.
So I requested for her to be in the meeting so that she can explain to the team why she reached the conclusions that she reached in that report and what are some of the benefits going forward that could help my son, and then how the IEP team should consider his visual impairment. Well, what I learned, which I knew she was a contractor, but what I learned And so if this ever happens again, I now know to ask, and you can do a FOIA to your school district and say, may I see the contract for the employee that's working with my child? What I learned is that school was out June 12th, but her contract ended June 6th or June 7th. Well, no one told me that.
So does that mean she couldn't come to the meeting?
She agreed to come to the meeting, then she withdrew her agreement. And there was nothing that could be done because her contract had expired. So for me as a parent of a child with the visual impairment, the question for me is, how do you contract a person to work with the child and that contract expires before the end of the school year? I can't reconcile that, because clearly the meeting was held on the last day of school and her presence was needed. She felt, through no fault of her own, well, I wrote a report up and I gave it to everyone. But that's not sufficient. People should have an opportunity, specifically me, to ask questions about that report, how you reach those conclusions, what data you relied upon.
To get a better understanding of how you came up with that report.
So that was the first allegation. So what I'm going to read to you now, and so I said that because parents, if you want the speech person there and the speech person is not there, you have a right to really demand that they be there, because that's going to be the topic of what you're talking about. And they're the certified professional in that particular discipline. And I'll just say this. In one meeting, there was a person in a meeting who was talking about my son's vision. And she said, and she was not certified or qualified to even have that conversation. She told me, well, my son has that same condition and the eyeglasses are the correction. Well, A, she has no certification to speak on that. B, she's injecting her personal information and personal bias and personal family history into a conversation that has nothing to do with her family or her son. And C, she was factually incorrect, because the condition that my son has is not 100% corrected with glasses. So this is why it's important to have that specialized, certified provider in that meeting to talk about that specialized issue. So allegation 1, proper participants at the June 4th, 2004 IEP team meeting. The IEP team must include the student's parent, at least one regular education teacher of the student, if the student is or may be participating in regular education environment, at least one special education student. Here they're telling you who should be in the meeting. A representative of the public agency who is qualified to provide or supervise the provision of the specially designed instruction. That would be the visual impairment person, visual instructional person, and is knowledgeable about general education curriculum and about the availability of resources of the public agency, and an individual who can interpret the instructional implications of evaluation results. At the discretion of the parent or public agency, other individuals who have knowledge or special expertise regarding the student, including related services personnel as appropriate, and the student when appropriate. And that is directly pulled from the 34 Code of Federal Regulations, and then COMAR, which is the state regulations. And so it says the specific of the meetings, the specific members of the IEP team may be excused from attending an IEP meeting in whole or in part if the parent and the public agency consent to excusal in writing. What I will say is that a lot of times you'll see people, they'll say, oh, I got to jump off. I have another message. I'm sorry, I have another meeting, so I have to jump off. If you understand what that says, that says in whole or in part. So as I conclude, in this case, on June 4th, 2024, the IEP team was rescheduled to June 11th. The meeting invitation reflected that the TVI person would attend. That's the visual instructional specialist. The PWN on June 11th says that the IEP meeting reflects that the complainant did not agree to provide written consent or excusal of the student's TVI from that meeting. That's me saying I do not agree to her excusal. Although the TVI submitted a written report that was reviewed during a previous IP meeting, she had previously confirmed that she would attend if the meeting were rescheduled. The IEP team meeting was rescheduled. Still, the TVI person did not attend the meeting. The TVI is the team member who has knowledge and expertise regarding the student's vision. And then it talks based on, a lot of different language. It says, therefore, MSDE finds a violation. And this was a 22-page decision. There were multiple violations found. I just wanted to walk parents through that, Paula, so that they can understand when it is time to use your voice, when it's time to muster that courage and stand up to your IEP team and assert your rights. Now, what I will tell the viewing audience is that one of the things that was offered to me in the compensatory meeting was a non-public placement for my child at a very renowned educational, special educational institution in Washington, D.C. I'm grateful for that. I have accepted that. A referral has been made. And so now we're just waiting for the logistic steps to take place. And I'm very happy with that decision because I think at this point, this is my third or fourth complaints with the OCR, complaints with the Department of Justice. And it is obvious to me that the relationship is irretrievably broken. And so I no longer have trust in the IEP team or the district. And the only thing that's going to make me feel better is to remove my son from that position. So, and this will be paid for by the school district. So again, you can fashion your remedy, craft your remedy, and propose it. And it's up to the school to accept or deny it. Either way, they have to document why they're accepting or denying it. And I just wanted to give that personal example to kind of put all of what we've talked about over these two different sessions, to put it into action and to teach parents how to get to compensatory services and or compensatory education.
And I do want to let everybody know that many of us are talking when we're bringing the information to you. A lot of times we're doing it firsthand. We've dealt with so much, and a lot of times, like Lisa said, she's in the trenches of things right now. It's not a happy place to be, but like we talked before we got on, and I was like, a lot of what we're going through is so someone else does not have to go through it. So understand and know that this has been blood, sweat, and tears. This is not, something that we haven't gone through and we're just bringing it to you, just telling you what we think. No, we're going through it or we have gone through it firsthand. So I just say that to say that, please, guys, take this information, be um, as proactive for your special needs individual as possible. And like Lisa said, these all of these slides are going to be available. We're going to develop a resources page for our website, and we're going to put these things on there because I don't know about anybody else, but I wish I had this when I had to pay for it. I had to pay for someone to come and fight my fight. If I'd have known a lot of the information that I know now, I could have fought my own fight. So please, we just want so many of you guys just take heed of this information. And many of us, like Lisa said, and I had a speech therapist on before, we can do compensatory. You can. But a lot of the times you have lost time. And as we know, time is something that you cannot get back. And if your child is in the midst of learning something right now, imagine you bringing something from the past and putting that on top of what they're learning now. So it kind of does your special needs individual a disservice because
Yes.
now they're being penalized almost because of what was lost, and you're now giving them double work. So that's why we're just
Yes.
trying to get you guys to stay ahead of the game, because you don't want them to feel like, we know we're fighting for their rights, but in their eyes, they're looking like at it as if they're being penalized because someone did not do their job.
Mhm.
So I just definitely want you all to just take heed and just be as, just please ask your questions. Get in touch with us. If you have questions, we're here to answer them. If you have any type of idea that something could be going on, follow your gut instinct and roll with it. That's how I say. So those are my closing remarks. At least I'm going to give you an opportunity to close us out.
I just want to say thank you again, Paula, for this opportunity to share. It's so much information, it's overwhelming. Um, and just from a personal perspective, my heart grieves for this population of students because they're truly the most vulnerable population in our nation.
Mhm,
And we need parents to stand up and get the courage to
mhm,
speak up for their children and to take actionable steps towards aligning their child's education experience with the unanimous Supreme Court decisions that we discussed in this particular presentation. And that's the 2017 Andrews decision and the 2023 Perez decision. Take meaningful, actionable steps to align your child's educational experience with these legal decisions that
mhm.
give you full authority to do so. And with that, I just end. Advocacy for me is a way of life, and I'm
Mhm.
dedicating my life to this community, and I'm excited about it. I'm tired in my body, my feelings are hurt, my heart is broken by the recent interactions with the school district. But I'm never going to give up fighting for these children, and I'm never going to give up fighting for my child.
That's right. And that's the attitude that we have to have. That's the attitude that we have to have. So again, I thank you guys for joining us for part two of compensatory. Send in your questions. You have questions, send them to us. And like I said, we're going to upload these slides on to the advocacy's resource page so that you have them as a way of reflecting back and saying, wait a minute, I may have forgotten this. Well, okay, we're going to have it on our website. And again, for those that don't know, we're having our first annual walk November the 8th. We are so excited. It's Tucker Road Community Center. We're having it November the 8th. You can go online and register now. I have put the registration link on the advocacy, and you'll probably see it floating all around on our the various social media pages. We also have the registration on our website. So please come out, please join us in this fight. If you can't join us, you can even go on and make a donation. Again, we're trying to help parents with this IEP process, help them understand it, because ultimately, if their kids win, you win. So we have to look at this as a community. As a community, don't think about it not being your child. Doesn't have to be your child for you to feel that pain. So
Mhm.
we're just asking everybody to come out with us on November the 8th. We're going to have a good time. We're excited. We're going to just get out there, walk, get some exercise in, get some community involvement, and then come out and meet members of our advocacy team. Everybody won't be able to be there, but guess what? You can meet some of our team. But we're still going to start doing some more community events where you can come out and meet parts of our team. Okay? All right. Well, thank you so much, Lisa, again for doing such a great job. You and Keisha did a great job on these slides. Thank you. And again, thanks for always taking the time to educate us. And again, I give you virtual hugs because I know you're going through, but guess what? You are definitely your pain and your suffering is helping our our parents of that's just starting their journey. So as we all say, we don't want to go through it, but we're going through it for a reason.
Yes.
So with that being said, guys, I want to say goodbye, good evening, have a great weekend. And again, get out there and get that registration going for our walk on November the 8th. All right, everybody, have a good one.